Good, good afternoon to all the students who've joined us today. Our students, that's what it's all about, is you. And today I'm very fortunate to be able to be the moderator of a panel of three absolutely leading experts on the Southern Africa cyber security scene. And I'm going to introduce them to you now. Our panel discussion today, as you know, is the panel discussion is on the state of cybersecurity in Southern Africa. And we're going to be having a really interesting discussion, and you guys need to listen closely because a lot of what you hear today is going to help you set the scene for the rest of this course. So without further ado, I'd like to start, and I'm going to start with Dr. Jabu Mtsweni. Dr. Jabu Mtsweni is the lead of information and cybersecurity at the CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in Pretoria. He's also a research fellow at the Security Institute for Governance and Leadership in Africa, and he is a leading cybersecurity researcher, but also, I would say, policymaker and strategist on a very high level to government. Secondly, we have Mr. Simphiwe Mayisela, who is the Managing Director of SS Cybersecurity Consulting. He is also a member of the Southern African Development Community Secretariat. And Simphiwe is one of the best qualified people you're ever going to see in cybersecurity. I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions to him at the end about certifications. But we really welcome him to this discussion. He's beaming in, he's on a business trip at the moment to Zim, so he's beaming into us from Harare on his trip, and he's making time for us, and we really do appreciate that. Last but not least is a long-standing colleague of mine, Mr. Douglas Mapuranga, who, when I first met him, he was the head of cybersecurity at the Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe. He's now the MD of a company called Abangani Cyber in Harare. He's been a leading light in terms of ISACA in Zimbabwe, helping a lot of young people find their way in terms of the IT profession. And he has also been a member of the research working group on cyber risk and digital financial inclusion for the Carnegie in Africa, for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So, gentlemen, thank you for your time today and welcome to our panel. And without further ado, I'm going to dig in and start asking some questions. So first up, if you're all okay with this, just to remind you that the session is being recorded unless you have an objection to that. And secondly, if it's all fine with you, I'm going to use first names. So Simphiwe, the first question is understanding emerging cyber threats in Southern Africa. To your mind, what do we see as the latest trends and techniques used by cyber attackers in the region? And how do we start going about improving and exploring better or more effective strategies to mitigate these threats?
Okay, thanks, Noel. Thanks to the students and thanks to everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. What we see as emerging cyber threats in Southern Africa, Noel, is there's a number of them. I'll list them, but I will start with ransomware attacks. Why I'm starting with them? Because we've seen a prevalence of ransomware attacks targeted to state-owned entities within Southern Africa, dating back since 2019, in actual fact, and they're starting to rise. The most recent one was the one at CIPC, and we've seen a number of them. From 2019, we had City of Power. In 2020, there was a Life Healthcare Group, UIF. The Experian was also hacked, which is our credit bureau. In 2021, we saw Transnet being hit by massive ransomware, and Transnet happens to be a key point area within South Africa. In 2021, we saw the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development also being hit twice by a ransomware in 1 year. And what made it worse, we also saw the South African National Defence Force also being hit by ransomware, And all of these attacks, are not really that sophisticated. We see attackers exploiting what seems to be what is fundamental within the cybersecurity fraternity. Things like patch management is things like are quite basic and foundational in cybersecurity, which we see are not being done continuously by these companies that have fallen victim. The management of their solutions as well have not been properly managed. Hence, we're seeing this rise of cyber attacks. But what we need to do, and given the fact that the audience here is students, we need to look at security 101, cybersecurity 101. Let's date back to the year around 2000 when firewalls were first invented. Subsequent to that, firewalls were doing well up until such time they were no longer that effective. Why? Because we saw attacks. The most important attack vector that is done by hackers is moving laterally on the network and escalating their privileges to that of a domain admin or anyone who's got super admin privileges, so that they can make their exploits much more effective. One way to prevent lateral movements that we've been doing traditionally was using firewalls, where we brought the concept of virtual LANs or VLANs. We used to segment the networks using firewalls to ensure that attackers don't move laterally within the network, and ensure that we isolate the areas that were affected, so that we can keep them and quarantine them and deal with them before bringing back them into the network. However, attackers have found ways to circumvent that. They do things like VLAN hopping, so VLANs no longer help. What I see as the most prevalent solution against a ransomware attack, over and above having proper EDR or EDR technologies, is to have what is called macro-segmentation. Macro-segmentation does not only segment at the network layer, but it segments at an asset and application layer. And most companies have struggled to implement this, given the cumbersomeness that comes with having those granular rules being built on the asset base. But most of that have been automated with zero trust coming into play, multi-factor authentication, step-up authentication, and all of that. So based on my experience, I think micro-segmentation will be the correct solution going forward. And it's quite recent. I think it's technology that came in around 2023 or 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So another emerging threat that we're seeing now that is prevalent is phishing attacks. Phishing attacks target individuals through deceptive emails, messages, websites, in order to steal sensitive information such as login credentials and other financial information. And now, phishing attacks have been made even more sophisticated using AI, artificial intelligence. So what we see now is things like deep fakes, whereby someone emulates probably Dr. Msweni's voice, and I call Dr. Msweni's wife, purporting to be Dr. Msweni. And Dr. Msweni's wife hears this voice. It's similar to his husband's voice, requesting her to transfer funds into an account. It's easy for Dr. Msweni's wife to fall victim to such an attack, because they are so deceptive. They sound real, and we've seen deep fake videos, and they also come in the form of voice, where I purport to be calling you. And such attacks are difficult to circumvent, because the human element has been the weakest link in the whole security chain. We know that. The quickest way to get a toehold into an organization is to send someone a phishing email, hoping that they will, fall victim and click it. But what we've seen now also is what is called business email compromise, which is a different kind of spear phishing attack, whereby it is sent to targeted people within an organization, and it always involves an invoice being sent to someone within probably a finance department, and looking exactly like the invoice that they normally pay every month, except that the fact that in this time the invoices, the banking details have been changed to that of an attacker. And such emails are difficult to identify first. And also, there's a lot of finger pointing exercise after the incident has occurred, because there's a lot of losses and the banks try to protect themselves, Banks refer to them as push kind of cybercrime, whereby the victim was manipulated into making the payment. And in such cases, banks usually don't take a loss. When banks report on their bank losses, they don't include that as a loss. And normally they attack small SMEs, and usually the financial implication on a smaller SME is quite high compared to large corporates. And you will find them even closing business. We've seen cases where SME owners have even committed suicide following such attacks, And I think to protect that, we need to see government funding such businesses, any small business. We need to see things like cyber in a box, We have seen government coming forth, assisting SMEs in terms of funding. I think part of the arsenal that they need to include for SMEs is things like cyber in a box, whereby they get protected from cyber attacks from inception. And also, lastly, the insider threats are getting rife, Insider threats involve employees or individuals within the company with legitimate access to sensitive information, advertently or inadvertently causing harm to any organization's security. The recent incident around IEC is a good example, IEC was on the news this morning regarding an incident that took place on Monday, where an employee sent out all the election candidates to an outsider, and highly sensitive information regarding political affiliations and all of that was published. Even the information regulator had to come to a party. They sent them a notice period to appropriately respond to that incident, in order to avoid a fine. So yes, in my world, these are the 4 emerging cyber threats that we're starting to see in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Simpiwe. I think you've set the stage, and you have demonstrated the vast array of different threat vectors, and potentially, and we'll probably dig down into this, maybe, especially in certain sectors or on certain levels of the economy, how unprepared we are for this. So following on with that, Jabu, I want to ask you about collaboration between the public and the private sector in South Africa. How are we doing on that? And what is the role of collaboration in terms of improving the state of cybersecurity in Southern Africa? How important do you regard this type of a public-private partnership?
No, thank you, Noel, and thank you for inviting me and for being part of the panel. And I want to greet everyone who's on the call. Thank you for making time to listen to us. And I think cybersecurity, particularly in Southern Africa, is one of the most important topic that we need to deal with. I think Simpiwe has spoken a lot about some of the issues from the technical point of view, and it's very clear to me that cybersecurity is not just a technical issue, but also it's not an issue that can only be addressed by government alone. It can be addressed by organizations alone, or private sector. It requires a collaborative effort. It requires all of us, from the users, whether you are a technical expert, you are a technologist or not, for us to come together, as well as the countries, within the SADC, but also internationally. And the reason collaboration is very, very important is because the cybersecurity incidents that happen, they don't discriminate, right? Whether you are a bank, whether you are a government entity, whether you're a small company, whether you're an NGO, the criminals, they are looking for one thing and one thing only. Wherever they find, the crown jewels, whether it's the personal information, whether it's the intellectual property, they will go after it, you know, and whether you are a state security agency, you are the police, they will always look for that data. And because sometimes when you use technology, we also tend to relax and think that technology is sort of like a panacea, it can do everything. But we know that technology has many you know, weaknesses, and we see it. The more we bring in new technologies, you can be talking about AI now, you could be talking about various platforms that we generate, the vulnerabilities, they increase. And that is why collaboration becomes so critical between these different entities. And then of course, you know, starting between the private sector as well as the public sector, collaborations become so important, particularly in sharing of information, you know, so simple things like sharing information, because if, let's assume there's an incident that has happened at CIPC, as Simphiwe was indicating, generally many people will not know how the criminals or the hackers may have gone through. We would know that there was some weakness, but the indicators of compromise are generally not shared amongst the entities. And that is why you'll find that, for example, at Standard Bank, at Liberty, you know, at Dis-Chem, you know, at Department of Justice, and all of these others, the modus operandi may be the same, it just differs a bit. But if we were collaborating and sharing information, we are able to keep these criminals on their track. But criminals, they also enjoy the fact that, I think being hacked is still considered a taboo, right, nowadays, because when people are hacked, you know, there's a story on the news, everyone is laughing maybe at the company that has been hacked. But I think collaboration will tend to reduce some of those taboos, you know, because ultimately, for me, I look at the cyber nuisance, if I can call it that way, as something that can only be solved by us coming together and collaborating, because that's very critical. We have seen, just to give a typical example, you know, with the pandemic, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic, the only way we could address it, you know, and get rid of it is when everyone comes to the party. You know, there are people who are wearing masks, so users need to be aware and play their part. There's government that plays their part. There's private sector that comes in and play their part. There's international or regional community like in SADC that also plays their part. And I think the message, as I hand back to you, Noel, is that collaboration is also not just about addressing the problems that have occurred. We also need to collaborate about the solutions. How do we, you know, work together in creating solutions to address these problems that are local, creating solutions that are regional, because, you know, like Simphiwe is in Zimbabwe now. We are connected. So sometimes if he can be hacked in Zimbabwe, we are probably, he can also affect us. So we always need to think that it's not just about one organization, it's about all of us. For example, when CIPC or the master deeds are hacked, all of our data is impacted, because all of us would have maybe have a small company, we have registered and stuff like that. And no one is sort of let scot-free. Hence, it's very important when we think about solutions in this cyberspace, we think of it in a collaborative way, or else we are not going to solve the challenges that we have.
Thank you, Jabu. You know, you raised a number of really important points here. I think for me, you know, specifically like a major one that we don't talk about enough is information sharing. And allowing a safe space, especially from entities who've been hacked, to share that information, and, you know, for us to understand exactly that, the indicators of compromise. And I'll probably touch back on this a bit later, but the fact that we do not have an adequate view of our national cybersecurity estates or our threat landscapes. I don't think. Douglas, I'd like, you know, backing onto what Jabu's been speaking about now, where we start talking about the development of cybersecurity capabilities, especially the operationalizing of national computer emergency response teams and CSIRTs, the sector response for cybersecurity. How are we doing on this in terms of countries in Southern Africa? You know, in many cases, for example, where I've done work, there are sector certs in name, but they don't appear to be actually functional, and companies and entities in that sector don't know about them. So, this is, of course, you know, when we start talking about collaboration and gathering this information and sharing it, where certs are actually so important. So, speak to us about what do we need to do to operationalize these things, or how, you know, what is the status quo? Where do we stand?
Thanks, Noel, and good afternoon to everyone. Some insightful points there from my colleagues. But indulge me a bit, Noel, here. Let me just give the context. Since this is, we are addressing students, perhaps one of the things we need to address is, what is cybersecurity? And I think once we get that between our ears, really, we then should be able to define some of the aspects that Simphiwe has raised, and also Doc has also talked about. So what is cybersecurity? In a very short description, it's a triad, the CIA triad. And when we talk about cybersecurity, we're really talking about three things: confidentiality, integrity of information, and availability of that information to the people that are authorized to access it. So essentially, that is what cybersecurity is really about. And why do we bother about cybersecurity? We're really trying to protect our information assets, okay? In the form of, in nation states, what we are really looking at is critical infrastructure, among other things. So those are the issues that we're trying to protect the family jewels, so to speak, both at corporate level and also at national level. Now, from a strategic point of view, what is the importance of cybersecurity? So when we speak about cybersecurity and IT strategy in that respect, what we are basically trying to do is to ensure that we deliver value. We deliver value to corporates, and we deliver value to the nation, okay? I will use corporates and nation interchangeably, because the value delivery is really the same. Effectively, when you're talking about the nation or the country, you're just enlarging the pool of assets that you're trying to protect. At strategic level, you're really trying to ensure that you deliver business objectives, and there is strategic alignment with those business objectives to the IT strategy, so to speak. Secondly, you want to ensure that you optimize risk. And don't be fooled by the word optimize here. When we say risk optimization, we are really talking about reducing the risk of, humans are prone to errors. And when we bring in ICTs, we are trying to reduce the rate of errors and security and enhancing security at the same time. When we speak about strategy delivery, we are also talking about resource optimization, where what we're trying to do here is to ensure that with our investment in ICTs, we ensure that the company uses all its assets, most of the ICT assets, hence the need for strategic alignment between the IT strategy and the business strategy, and even at country level, to ensure that we deliver value. And lastly, we need to ensure that there is performance management. So when we are operating within the ICT industry, for example, or more specifically, because we're talking about cybersecurity, whether an intern, a manager, an executive, or a director, effectively, those are the issues that you're trying to look at. And that's when, obviously, we then start talking about the value delivery and so on. Now, very closely coupled to the things that I've just spoken about is PPT, people, process, and technology. And there must be a balance between those things, okay? Whether you're talking at corporate level and at country level. So the issue that I'm going to be talking about, the CIA, computer incident response teams and so on, effectively, we are now talking about protecting critical infrastructure, and obviously ensuring that whether it's at corporate level, strategic level, our assets are protected, our people are protected, our processes are protected, and our technology is protected. So in a nutshell, that's essentially what the discussion is all about. Simphiwe started off on the threat landscape that he spoke about, where he was talking about the issues or the various attacks that are emerging in recent times. Effectively, those are some of the issues there that we are trying to guard against. And obviously, Doc spoke about, again, the landscape there. Now, coming to CIRTs or computer incident response teams at national level, and I've already spoken to you about the issue or the need for critical infrastructure. And normally what we find across SADC and across the world, if one looks at, say, the Global Cybersecurity Index, for example, which I'll talk about a bit later on, we look at how national countries or governments or countries or governments are trying to protect their critical infrastructure. And how do they do this? Normally, they do this through legal instruments. For example, in Zimbabwe, we have the Cyber and Data Protection Act, which was promulgated around December 2021. And within that legislation, you find that a company called Potras, a local company, is in charge of providing that oversight. And I think, if I heard correctly, Noel, you raised a point earlier on where you said, how well are we doing on this? And I think the biggest problem within the SADC region has been that we have the laws, okay? But the challenge that we have is operationalizing the various tenets of the laws that we've enacted. And there are various reasons for this. It could be a skills issue. If those guys, the guys that are connected were in yesterday, there was a discussion relating to whether Africa as a continent has a problem with skill or experience. And I think the discussion tended to sway towards perhaps the lack of experience. We have a lot of graduates, but do they have the necessary experience to do so? But that's a separate discussion. So when it comes to response teams, are we doing enough as nation states, or are the SADC countries doing enough to protect their critical infrastructure? And obviously, as we speak now, the answer would be no. Why do I say that? Well, if you look at the SADC bloc and you look at the rating of their rating on the GCI or the Global Cybersecurity Index, they were rated as of 2020 at 36.42. Okay. Now there's a positive in that, and there's a negative in that. What is the negative? It's negative because it's low. In fact, the majority of SADC countries, all 16 of them, with the exception of a few which I'll mention, are in the bottom third of the GCI. Okay. Now it's good in the sense that we are starting to acknowledge that we have a problem. Because the first thing that you need to do before you resolve a problem is to agree or to concur that, yes, indeed, we have a problem. But the silver lining in that is, if you look at, say, Mauritius is rated or scored 96.89. It's the highest ranked country in Africa, okay? The perfect score went to the United States, and closely, obviously, for comparison's sake, Saudi Arabia and the UK were at 99.54. And because we have a relationship with the Dutch here, they were scored at or rated at 97.05, okay? So it gives you a context. Zimbabwe was rated at 36.49. This is as of 2020. And it paints a picture, because most of the countries within the SADC bloc are in their 30s or below. And there is urgent need to speak to the issues that the doc here expressed, collaboration. And you find that as we go on in this discussion later on, the common thread in our discussion will be collaboration, digital literacy, cybersecurity awareness, and so on. Let me pause in, Noel, and allow others to come in as well. Thank you very much.
Doug, you raised, I think, very, very important points, specifically around strategic alignment, but also in terms of perhaps the SADC region as a whole, wanting to and needing to do better. So you know, to link onto that, and gents, our time is flying. So over the next 3 series of questions, I'm going to ask you to keep them, your answers a little bit, truncate them somewhat for us. Simpiwe, in terms of the regulatory landscape, which Douglas spoke to in Southern Africa, and compliance challenges, can you discuss the existing cybersecurity regulations in Southern Africa? And specifically, what are the compliance challenges faced by organizations when identifying best practices for adherence to regulatory requirements?
Okay. So when it comes to regulatory requirements in South Africa, I will date back as early as, let me say, 2015. 2015 is the year where we saw most of improvements around, you know, those legislations. That's the year when we saw the National Cybersecurity Policy Framework. Although it was drafted in 2012, it was finalized in 2015. We also saw the establishment of the Cyber Command, also around the year of 2015. And more importantly, the Cyber Crimes and Cybersecurity Bill was drafted in 2015. But subsequent to that, in my opinion, I think there was a change in priorities in government. You know, cybersecurity no longer became a priority. The government started prioritizing things like corruption, poverty, unemployment, and a lot of things. And the cybersecurity somehow lost that kind of priority. Be that as it may, we saw the Cyber Crimes Act getting enacted about 2 years ago. Yes, it's a well-written kind of legislation. It has its own flaws or gaps, but I will not dwell much on those. But the important thing is that the enforcement thereof is lacking. Yes, we've got a good piece of legislation, but it's not difficult. It's very, very difficult to enforce it. One, it's because of the skills amongst law enforcement in the law enforcement value chain. So when I speak about the law enforcement value chain, I speak about the police officers, the judiciary. When I say the judiciary, I mean the judges and the magistrates responsible for passing out, you know, sentences. And I'm also referring to the prosecutors, the National Prosecuting Authority. None of those circles are well versed when it comes to cybersecurity. I will give you an example. It's very difficult to go to any police station and go and open a docket around you being phished or suffering a business email compromise incident. The person or the police officer across the table that is supposed to record the docket won't understand the jargon that you're presenting to him. Why? It's because the skills shortage. Yes, although in the advent of democracy around 1994, there was a special unit that was established by the Hawks called the Cybercrime Unit. And we saw that those guys even went as far as being trained by the FBI around the issues of cybercrime and cybersecurity. But in that fraternity, it's a revolving door. There's a high staff turnover. Those that were trained became more attractive to, you know, private companies and other corporates. So it's not a continuous thing. As much as we've brought the agenda around gender-based violence to the fore, we need to bring issues of cybersecurity and cybercrime to the similar kind of attention and platform. We need to start creating schools of excellence or pockets of excellence within the entire law enforcement value chain so that these legislations can be enforced. We need to see skilled cybersecurity police officers, you know, able to deal with such matters. We need to be able to get those matters prosecuted. As it stands, I can violate the Cyber Crimes Act. I'll pay a bail, and the next day I'll be out on the streets walking. And it's going to be difficult for them to prosecute me because they don't even understand what they're dealing with. How can you regulate something that you don't even know? So that's my take. Thank you.
The point that you're making about the law enforcement value chain is a critical one, and I think something that SAPS are very aware of, and they've been struggling with for quite a long time to get that right, in terms of doing things like reporting a cybercrime at police station level. It's almost impossible. And the Hawks only look at cyber crimes over a certain value. So this is something we're really wrestling with, and it's a very important point. Jabu, backing onto this, when we're starting to talk about Southern Africa and you know, around discussions around cybersecurity innovation, we need innovation, local innovation, for a number of reasons. One, you know, in the same way that we want to have a sovereign defense industry, we actually want a sovereign cybersecurity industry. We want to own those capabilities. But, you know, so that's one reason to have it, and to decrease dependency on other producers, you know, to have control over our value chain to a certain extent. But we also want to, I think, you know, start getting some or other mechanism to protect ourselves against the atrocious cost of importing software and tools and hardware, and especially as our currencies continue to battle against major currencies. Everything is dollar priced. This is making life very hard for us. It's making it very expensive for us. What are your thoughts on cybersecurity innovation? Do we continue to consume, or do we start building our own tools and arsenals?
Yeah, it's a very, thank you, Noel, very, very complex topic, and it's easier said than done. Having, you know, traveled to the world, having seen what other countries are doing in innovation, definitely Africa, we know that our innovation index is very low. Even though South Africa may be at least, you know, leading in Africa. But let me give you a typical example in terms of why some of these things are very complex. One of the issues is obviously the lack of investment, right? Because you can innovate, but if there's no investment, you then have a challenge. You know, the United States started dealing with issues of cybersecurity and, you know, research and development and innovation. By 2000, by year 2000, they were already having an act, you know, within the country that regulates how issues of cybersecurity, research and development and innovations are actually taken care of within the country. Japan is one of them. I think they're one of the leading. You know, in the US, I think in 2023, their budget just towards R&D and innovation from the cybersecurity perspective in terms of building homegrown tools, supporting small companies, you know, to build these innovative tools. Their budget just for that alone is way over $1 billion, if I look at it in South African money, right? Now, in South Africa, I don't even think you even have a fraction of that, right? So you've got $1 billion, because if you look today, the impact of that, you would look, let's say, at all the big cybersecurity companies, you know, they will come from the US, right? Generally, many of them, right? And it's not by chance, it's by investment. It's by ensuring that we innovate, we try, and we fail. And that's very, very critical. In an African context, we may have organizations like ours where there's some small investment done there and there in terms of building homegrown tools, because that's very, very important, right? You know, somebody, I think he was talking about the police issue. If you want the police to be able to do the work, but they don't have the tools, it becomes also difficult, right? Because if, let's say, they don't pay the license fees from company A or company B, it becomes a problem, right? Because that company can easily close the taps. I want to give you a typical example. Nowadays, you know, in South Africa, there's this political tension between Israel and us going to ICC and so on and so forth. Israel, for example, now is refusing to sell us you know, some of the digital forensic tools because of some of these political ramblings. We have seen it. It happens also in China with Huawei and America. You know, we can see it now with TikTok. So that is why it's very critical for us to think about innovation, even if we can start in the smallest possible ways, because in as much as we can balance, but ultimately when it comes into the cyber conflicts or even the normal natural wars that we see, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, we know that when the country, they get into that level, it's very easy for them to either close the taps where you might not even have access, or they may use those tools to also attack you. Hence, it's very important to start thinking about this innovation because it plays a very critical role. But as I close off, just like I've said with collaboration, innovation is not just the responsibility of a government or private sector. The responsibility is about partnerships. You know, in Africa, we need to partner more and more and more together. And I think countries, particularly in Europe, the reason sometimes they thrive is not because they have everything on their own, but sometimes they are able to tap into their allies. You can look even in other contexts as well. So I think it's very important. Of course, within us, we always have to balance, right? Like Microsoft will always be there. So how do we balance and ensure that at least we at least, even if we are standing, at least we are standing on one leg?
Thank you, Jabu. Some really excellent points there, especially around innovation and how innovation works, but also I think understanding this need to ensure that one has a modicum of control over your own critical systems. Very, very important. Dougie, my question to you is, and this is a closing question before I open the floor to students in our last 10 minutes. So Dougie, quickly speaking, can you outline for us, here's the question, it's a simple one. Can small and medium enterprises in Southern Africa actually afford adequate cyber security?
Yep, it's supposed to be an easy question, Noel, but I'm not sure if it is.
No, it's not an easy question.
Well, it's a bit tricky. I don't think it on the cuff. I don't think SMEs are fully adequately prepared to incur the costs of full digitalization. And again, it speaks to what Jabu has said in terms of collaboration. What we have seen in recent times is that there's a lot of outsourcing that is happening within SADC, more so in Zimbabwe, where these small companies don't necessarily have to hire the best of the best, but they can access some of the skill sets that they require through a part-time consultancy services and so on. Because obviously, having such huge skill sets also comes at a very high cost. So in a nutshell, that's how I would respond to it, Noel.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, the worrying thing here, obviously, is SME, small business is the lifeblood of every actual economy. Small business needs to thrive and function. We can't just depend on corporates. So, I think this is, and small businesses are just the low-hanging fruit. I think Simpiwe spoke about business email compromise, and across the spectrum, from attorneys to state agents, everybody's being pummeled and pounded by this, and African economies, especially in Southern Africa, are losing immense amounts of money to cybercrime. At this point, we are opening the floor to students who wish to ask a question. If you do wish to ask a question, please raise your hand. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue with the speakers. So for the three of you, I'd like to actually ask you the question, and it's a great question for people involved in cybersecurity. What keeps you up at night? But just firstly, I've got William waiting to ask a question. So if he's unmuted, I'm going to say, please go ahead. Let me see if I can allow Mark. William, I think about if you can unmute your mic, you can go ahead and ask the question.
Oh, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My question is that I just want to know if SMEs cannot have like one mother body. Let's say, for example, SMEs in South Africa and different countries have maybe one mother body to govern such issues. So that is just my question, nothing further. Thank you.
This is a good question. Simpiwe, what are your thoughts on SMEs having a, I mean, as William suggests, potentially I suppose, a security and cybersecurity body that sort of looks after them, that they fit under, and that also maybe negotiates on their behalf. Nathi, I see you, and I know I pushed you yesterday to ask your question today, so you'll be up next. Simpiwe, what are your thoughts on a body for SMEs?
It's a question that's very close to my heart because I'm an SME as well. The government has not done anything or much for the SMEs. There's not even an ombudsman for SMEs to negotiate, things like, lower tax rebates, fair advantage on tenders and all that, you know. So I think that idea is too far-fetched in South Africa's context. It's just a pie in the sky. I don't think it's something that will happen now, although it's quite a good idea, but I don't see it happening, and I'm going to be that short.
Okay. Thank you for that. My next guest here, I can't find Nathi Chabalala, but I'm going to Pabalo Zulu. It's your chance to ask a question. I've unmuted your mic. Well, not I've enabled your mic. So go ahead, please. Pabalo Zulu. William, you can pop your hand down if you don't mind. So I've got a lot going on here. Right, Patla Maloka, I'm going to try you next. I'm allowing the mic for you. You can unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. I just wanted to ask on the issue of innovation.
Yes.
We face a lot of challenges with coming up with new ideas that we see that they would have a positive impact in cybersecurity. So how do we get rid of the obstacles and the impediments that we get, like finances and the processes of trying to find the actual innovation, patenting the ideas and trying to protect the ideas that would improve the innovation in cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. Java, I think this one's fits squarely in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so I think maybe the first thing is obviously there are very good examples in South Africa of innovation that have come and they are making various impact. And why I'm raising this is because sometimes, you know, innovation is a long process, and when it sort of appears, it may appear as if nothing is happening within the context of the country. We can give the simple example of Mimecast, right, which started here in South Africa. But of course, to answer the question directly, is in order for this innovation to gain legs, I want to repeat the point. You know, it's very important, obviously, government to fund, but we know government has limited resources. We also need to get the private sector to fund some of these initiatives, because if you look at various cybersecurity technologies, I can give you a simple example like Splunk, which is a SIM tool, right? They invest quite a lot of money to get that technology to be mature and to get into the mainstream industry and be competitive. We can go to Israel, how they do it, because unfortunately, without enough investment, the chances of getting this innovation up there is very, very limited. But in terms of the protection of it, I think that's a very important part as well. In South Africa, there's IP laws, and I think it's also very important for innovators, especially those who are SMMEs and they are in the building of some of the capabilities, you know, to reach out to maybe legal people, but there are also departments such as your Department of Science and Technology, where they need more in terms of IP protection, but also Department of Trade and Industry, because the protection of the IP is very, very important. We know what happens, for example, when IP is not protected. There are other cases which I'm not going to go through. But having said that, there are very successful stories that one can learn from. Mimecast is one, Maltigo is another one. And then, of course, there are some underlying base platforms such as those that are used by AWS that originates here in the country, and the originators of those went overseas, got some investment, and those solutions are now global. Because I think also when we think about this innovation, we must not only think about solutions just for South Africa, because cybersecurity is a global problem. Let's think globally as well, because if we think globally, we'll be able to also fast track some of this innovation. Thanks.
Good points there about making sure you know, innovate for a global market. But yeah, and some of the ones you mentioned, Thinks Canary is another. Nathi, I found you eventually, so I've unmuted you. Let's see your question, Nathi Chabalala.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for a very good course. I like the outline of it. But come from yesterday's question was that everyone was looking for a job. You know, it was much more centered around jobs, and I think Simpiwe has kind of answered a little bit of questions around SME businesses and entrepreneurs going into the cybersecurity space. But I'd like to understand what other lower hanging fruit for entrepreneurs seeking opportunities in cybersecurity, and is there support in South Africa or in the region or worldwide for small companies to find their niche and actually provide services? And
Thanks, Mark.
yeah,
Sorry.
okay, cool. And last
Sorry.
question would be also, how robust is the disaster recovery landscape in the country? Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nati. We're probably going to close with that. That's a nice question to go out with. On the question of opportunities for SMEs within the cybersecurity industry, you know, you're looking. Is your question specifically in terms of how do other companies plug into that cybersecurity value chain, non-cybersecurity companies?
It's cybersecurity companies. So, you know, just to model a business around the cybersecurity, because on my side, I'm venturing into computer vision, but in security. So, what other kind of avenues are there in cybersecurity?
Thank you. Simpiwe, would you like to have a go at that one quickly?
Yeah, well, you know, it's very hard being an SME in the cybersecurity space. What the advice that I can give is that you must not just go into there just for the sake of being another cybersecurity SME. You know, you must go there because you are passionate about cybersecurity. Because remember, cybersecurity is quite complex and it tends to be very, you know, strenuous. Not only as an SME, but also as a CISO working within corporates. We've seen that the highest burnout rate is among CISOs. So imagine how bad it is being someone who runs the company, dealing with various CISOs, you know, for that matter. So the only thing that will keep you running during that time is your passion. It's no longer, it's nothing else. So don't go in that or start a business around cybersecurity if you're not passionate about it.
Thank you. So we've run out of time, unbelievably. So I'm actually going to give each of you a chance to, in 1 minute, share your thoughts, and you can answer one of two questions. How robust is our national disaster response? Cyber, let's talk about a catastrophic cyber incident. Either that one, or, and this pretty much fits into the same category, what keeps you awake at night? So Dougie, let's start with you.
Okay, so yeah, indeed. The landscape is not great. As I said earlier on in my contribution, most national disaster recovery mechanisms are driven by legislation. And because most of this legislation has not been operationalized, yes, the law is there, but the tenants within that those acts or laws are not active for various reasons, skill, funding, and so on. You find that a lot of countries, especially in SADC, don't have the means to protect their critical infrastructure, including its own people, for example. So that is a problem. On a personal note, just to touch on the SME question, Noel,
Yeah.
I think broadly, yes, SMEs are in a very hard space in terms of finding opportunities and so on. But there's a bit of order, and I think this also applies across SADC, more so for Zimbabwe and South Africa. Those SMEs within the financial sector seem to have a bit more orderliness in terms of how to navigate the various economies in which they are operating in. For example, if you look at South Africa, if you want to develop a fintech, or a solution which is digital to service the country and in Zimbabwe. One now has to participate in the fintech regulatory sandbox, which brings you to close proximity to the regulator and other collaborative partners that you might find within that space. So there is some silver lining, so to speak, with regards to SMEs operating within the financial services sector. But of course, on a broader scale, there's much still to be done. In terms of what keeps me at night, I think because sometimes we tend to focus on the hard things, my biggest threat or my biggest problem is whether I've overlooked something that is so apparent, that is so hackable, that when it's found out, I'll be the laughing stock. I think that's basically my last closing point.
That's a good one. That's a good one, Doug. Simpiwe.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my closing thoughts. I'm going to ask the question about what keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
Some of the top concerns in cybersecurity field, they include the increasing sophistication of cyber attacks. So the type of cyber attacks that we see today are not the ones we saw 5 years ago. Even those that existed 10 years ago are still here. But we are seeing a new breed of cyber attacks that are more AI powered, which Noel, there's no way we can deal with them currently. Yeah. So, for instance, attacks that involve deepfakes, on all those kind of attacks, we are in a position where currently we cannot deal with those. So it's worrisome to think about that, and it of course it will keep you awake at night. The evolving nature of threats, the lacking awareness and training among users, and the shortage of skilled professionals in the field, as well as the growing complexity of these cyber attacks are indeed worrisome, and they keep me up at night. What I think is going to be a solution going forward is that the sooner we realize that we are fighting a common enemy and that the need to collaborate has become more prevalent or more important than ever before, the better. We need to start working, even this competition that exists among technology vendors must stop. We need to see collaboration even at that level where we involve technology vendors to come up with solutions to deal with this common enemy. So we are dealing with one common enemy. CISOs, everyone that's on the blue team side or on the defense side must start collaborating to fight this enemy. Those are my closing thoughts.
That's excellent summation. Thank you, Simpiwe. Dr. Msweni, over to you to close out for us, please.
No, thank you very much. I think the colleagues have touched on a lot of other things, so I'm not going to repeat what they are saying. But I think one of the critical things when it comes to how robust or resilient we are, there are a number of good things that are being done by different organizations in South Africa, and I look at organizations such as our Reserve Bank, doing some very, very great work. But you also look at our banking sector, those guys are doing some great work. Of course, there will always be shortfall. The question you ask is, how robust are we? For me, I would say we are as robust as much as we test, our response and our resilience. Because if we don't test, we are as good as zero. The more we test and the more we sort of do these drills, because that's also very, very important, right? Yeah. And we also need to start learning from the other physical world. I always say to people, if you look at the issues of safety, health, environment, and quality, long ago, before the Titanics and all that, those things were not so important. But if you go to each and every organization or building today, you find a fire extinguisher and stuff like that. Cyber still has a long way to go to get there. So that's how robust we are. What keeps me awake at night? Fortunately, I sleep. The reason I sleep is because I've seen a lot of work being done. When I look at this specific panel that we have had, there's been about 400 people here. I can tell you in 2005, 2009, you would never see so many people talking about this problem. And I'm very happy with such initiatives where there's more and more people getting into the environment. And I think Simpiwe is correct. We need the skills, we need more people. But of course, it's not going to be an overnight success. But such initiatives, needs to be appreciated and taken further, because 400 people that we are seeing here, they are going to make a world difference in ensuring that we protect our parents, we protect our children, we protect our companies, we protect our state. And I'm very much positive that it's coming. It might take a little bit more time, but I'm very positive that it's coming. That is why I sleep very well at night, knowing that there's a future, even with the challenges. Thank you.
Bobby, thank you. Gentlemen,
We've come a long way.
I would like to thank you all. I think, quite honestly, we could have gone for a whole nother hour and we still wouldn't be done talking about the things that we need to be talking about. But you were excellent panelists. And my hope is that you've given the students a really good overview of what it's actually like out there in the field, in the wild, as we like to say, in cybersecurity. I can't thank you enough. You're all extremely busy cyber professionals. You've given up your time. And yeah, on behalf of the whole SANCS team, and I'm sure the students as well, students, could we just show these gentlemen a round of appreciation, please? And thank you so much for giving us your time. Goodbye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, Noel.
Thank you.
Thank you.